My whole life, I've been a pretty big Star Wars fan. I watched the first 6 films over and over throughout my childhood and ate up pretty much anything to do with the property. Lately though, my interest in the franchise has slowly taken a nosedive. I initially thought it had something to do with growing up and just not loving kids' films as much, but every time I watch A New Hope, I still get giddy. The stuff I used to watch all the time still holds up, yes, even episodes 1 and 2, but despite a lot of Star Wars content releasing in the last few years, I don't really care about any of it. Granted, I never watched the Clone Wars series, so I guess I'm not a true fan, but I was happy knowing that those things were there if I ever wanted to check them out, but Episode 3 wasn't dependent on having seen it to follow along. But ever since the parasitic House of Mouse got their hands on the IP and marveled the shit out of it, I'm just too fatigued to stay on this train any longer. I don't really want to support Disney's quantity over quality strategy, so despite hearing good things about Andor, I'm happy to give it a miss. I enjoyed the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, but after the sloppy and contrived writing in the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, I'm not invested enough in the franchise to watch Mando's 3rd season. But despite that massive spiel, I'll still sell out for more good Star Wars games. After being disappointed by LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga and hating the EA Battlefront games, 2019's Jedi Fallen Order was an absolute delight to play. Not only was it the best Star Wars game in at least a decade, but it's become one of my favourites in the series ever. It brought a sense of joy to my life that I hadn't felt since The Force Unleashed in 2008, when I was 9 years old. Star Wars was back, and now there's a sequel. I went into this pretty much blind, having avoided trailers, reveals and reviews so that I could have a chance of reliving my experience with the first game again. And on that note, and bearing in mind that there will be major story spoilers, let's talk about Star Wars Jedi Survivor. From a general gameplay perspective, Jedi Survivor is basically a perfect sequel. Instead of taking the easy route and rehashing the first game again, it builds upon the foundation set by its predecessor. Throughout Fallen Order, you slowly had to re-establish your basic Jedi skills that Cal repressed after he went into hiding. You had to unlock the ability to Jedi flip, wall run, push and pull with the Force. You also gathered different bits of tech to help you on your journey, like the Scomp Link, the Rebreather, the powered zipline, and obviously the double-bladed lightsaber. At the beginning of Jedi Survivor, you still have all of this stuff to hand, which leaves room for even more exciting new toys to play with. A problem the gaming sequels have had for years is not really understanding how to move things along while also maintaining a sense of growth in your abilities. It's a bit of a kick in the balls to spend hours improving your character, and when you boot the next game, find yourself stripped of your powers and told, do it again. They usually try to incorporate it into the story by having you start off powerful and then nerfing you to hell and back, but it still hardly makes for a satisfying experience, especially when you play them back to back. Here, however, in the tutorial, you're still zipping around with BD-1 and wall running to traverse the environment from the get-go. From the beginning, you're still able to swim indefinitely underwater, front flip over gaps, and use all the coloured kyber crystals you unlocked during the events of the first game. This makes for a far more satisfying gameplay experience, particularly when you boot this right after Fallen Order. It allows you room to grow because instead of regaining what you lost, you have to develop your skill set by earning even more new abilities. The only thing I actually knew about Jedi Survivor before going into it was that the twin blade lightsaber stance was now a permanent unlock, but to my surprise, there were even more of them. We still have the single and double bladed stances which act as a rough all-rounder and a stronger form of crowd control respectively. The newly added twin blade is a faster and more aggressive attack form at the expense of raw damage output. Later on, we earn the blaster stance, which arms Cal with a firearm. This increases your long-range possibilities in combat since you've not only got a gun to hand, but your lightsaber strikes also use more thrusting moves as opposed to traditional swipes and slashes. And lastly, we have the crossguard stance, which makes use of a much slower, albeit more powerful moveset. Think of a traditional claymore, the sword, not the landmine. Increasing the number of lightsaber stances serves only to present us with more combat options, which allows for creative uses of the environment, enemy placement, and well-timed attacks. Saying that though, you can only actually have 2 stances available at any one time. By pressing left or right on the D-pad, you can switch between whichever stances you equip when resting at a meditation point, meaning that despite having a lot more options available, you'll never truly be prepared for every combat scenario. I find myself a little torn as to whether or not I like this move on the developer's behalf. On one hand, it adds an element of strategy to proceedings, where you'll have to assess the situation and decide which stances will be most appropriate. But on the other, you don't really know what position you're going to find yourself in until you get there, leaving a lot of it to blind luck. I think that I'm leaning more towards wishing that you had access to all of the stances at any one time, maybe using a new button combination or something, since it would open up a lot more doors for creative fighting, and switching from one to the other could prove a really satisfying gameplay mechanic. I don't know whether the addition of 3 more stances played a part in this, but I was a little disappointed to discover that the stance switch attacks from Fallen Order were absent here. The first game only really had the single and double bladed options, which probably made things easier for the developers, and Cal would automatically perform a special attack if you switch stance in the middle of a combo. In Jedi Survivor, this is completely gone, so now instead of these smooth flourishes upon swapping stances, it just kind of happens whenever the game can find an input-free frame. It's not a massive deal, but it is a little disappointing to see a sequel remove something pretty cool from the original. Aside from the stances, Cal also has a new variety of force powers and gadgety gizmos to help him on his journey. Environmental traversal is far more lateral than it was in Fallen Order, with a lot more emphasis on vertical navigation. The new Ascension cable acts the same as Batman's grappling hook, which quickly launches you up towards your target, as well as rideable mounts which always give you a boost when hopping off, and floating balloons that fire you into the sky. The new dash ability is great for covering more ground on a horizontal plane, especially when combined with the Jedi Flip, wall running, and Merrin's Charm, a new upgrade that allows Cal to pass through green shields, resetting his double jump. And then you have the new wall jump, glidable winged creatures, and the ability to slice through walls with your lightsaber, which are all incredibly useful for slowing down your fall speed and quickly descending an area. New puzzles are presented to us which we can try to navigate with new upgrades for BD1, like the Kobo Matter Sprayer, which lets you create a path for energy beams to burn, and the Electro Dart, which can be used to power generators from a distance. I don't really have a lot to say about these, but I think they're all really cool additions that improve the overall gameplay experience. Jedi Survivor has taken the groundwork laid out by the original and actually worked to improve it. Small things, like the fact that we can now fast travel, eliminates the slog of having to backtrack through an entire planet to get back to the Mantis, but since you can only do it between meditation points, it doesn't remove exploration altogether because you still have to make your way back to one of them. But then again, there are a few things that are a bit tacked on and don't seem to do anything beneficial for the game. You occasionally get the opportunity to use a Jedi mind trick on an enemy where you're given a binary dialogue choice, which doesn't seem to change anything really. I was intrigued at first because I thought that maybe only one of them would work and you'd have to consider what dialogue option would be easier to trick somebody into believing, but from my experience, it always works, 100% of the time. It's just a bit of a nothing mechanic. In general though, I'd say that the approach the Respawn took with improving the gameplay experience was mostly successful. That being said, there have been several performance issues logged by players all across the board since its release. Apparently, the PC port was unplayable at launch, but the console versions fared a little better. However, that's not to say that they were completely free of problems. I still ran into plenty of technical hiccups like a month and a half after the game launched on PS5. The frame rate was a common one for me. Despite playing in performance mode, the game never truly ran at a smooth 60 FPS, instead floating around the 40 to 50 mark with occasional tanks. It was often jarring watching a cutscene transition back into gameplay because the cutscene seemed to be locked to 30 frames, and the moment it tries to jump back to 60 can result in a brief lag. I also came across screen tearing, which wasn't nearly as common, but did happen quite a bit. There was also an abundance of glitches ranging from animations not triggering to death boxes just not functioning properly. Luckily, these were mostly not game-breaking and actually quite funny on occasions, but there is one bug I came across that ruined my endgame experience. One of the optional side quests involves talking to Kaij, Kaj, where she'll give you bounties to hunt, but I experienced a glitch where she refuses to talk and give me the objective. I fancy myself a bit of a trophy hunter, so was incredibly disappointed that my progress was halted by an unfixable bug, and that I will have to wait for Respawn to patch it. I'm not unreasonable, and I know that in this industry, it's more or less impossible to make a perfect, completely glitch-free game, but if you're going to charge £60 to £80 for a new highly anticipated AAA release, I expect there not to be a game-breaking glitch that, from the looks of it, thousands of people are experiencing. It's not a niche little thing that's hard to recreate and slip past QA testers. This appears to be happening to most people. Frankly, it's not in good enough condition right now to be sold at those kind of prices, even if the overall experience is still spectacular. But what Jedi Survivor lacks in overall polish, it more than makes up for with its immersive world building. What I really appreciated about Fallen Order was its decision to mostly omit well-known planets from the main series. There was no Tatooine, Hoth, Naboo, Bespin or Dagobah. In fact, the most well-known planet was probably Kashyyyk, which isn't exactly an A-list system in the galaxy. But this was certainly a good thing, because the overuse of planets like Tatooine in recent Star Wars media took it from being a backwater shithole that nobody knew existed to the centre of the universe where every important thing always seems to happen. It makes George Lucas's universe seem small in comparison to how it should feel. Jedi Survivor doubled down on this concept by starting off with the tutorial on Coruscant, which eases players back into the familiar world they know and love, and after the first hour or so, the galaxy opens up to reveal the more obscure systems Cal can travel to on his journey. There are planets like Jeddah, which featured in Rogue One, that, if you asked me what it was called, I couldn't for the life of me have told you, and Kobo, which, to my knowledge at least, was created for the game and hasn't appeared before. I love this, because it brings back that sense of feeling incredibly small in such a large universe, and each thing you discover feels like something only you have found. It's rewarding, it's immersive, and it works a lot better than killing snowtroopers on Hoth again. So overall, Jedi Survivor replicates the previous game's system of well-designed Metroidvania-style areas that loop back around themselves and make use of unlockable shortcuts in order to reduce backtracking later. But what Respawn did to improve this gameplay loop was to create more expansive and open-ended planets alongside the traditional linear levels. Systems like Coruscant and the Shattered Moon fall more in line with what you'd expect from Fallen Order, where they serve a narrative purpose and can be cleared from start to finish on one run-through, but may benefit from a return visit later to mop up any collectibles. The aforementioned Jeddah and Kobo, though, work more like pseudo-open worlds with a main base, that's where all your allies gather together, and then a massive expanse of discoverable things scattered around them. It works as a hub-and-spoke system, with the Jedi Archive sitting in the middle of the map, and everything else pushing outwards from there. Kobo is home to Pyloon Saloon, which could have easily been a pandering recreation of the Mos Eisley Cantina, but luckily for us, Respawn gave us more respect than that. The saloon feels unique in itself aesthetically, and from a gameplay perspective works more as a fire-link shrine from Dark Souls 1, link for that video in the top right. As you traverse and explore this entire system, you will come across random people out and about in the wilderness that normally give you a random quest to complete. If you do it, then they'll relocate to Pyloon Saloon, so as you play more and more, your little family of prospectors gradually grows more and more. Despite the holomap being significantly improved from its predecessor, it still doesn't work as a substitute for naturally exploring yourself. Those prospectors I mentioned don't show on the map, so you will have to make your way around, peeking through every nook and cranny to actually find things. The game wants and expects you to explore and find things for yourself, so it refuses to give you a big yellow arrow telling you where to go. You can set a marker in the map, but that won't produce a huge beacon in the world for you, so you'll have to keep opening the map to check on it. I can see this putting some people off since they're used to games having more quality of life inclusions, but I think it really works here. You're expected to find NPCs and then speak to them to get side quests. You have to put in the work to get the reward. Your reward for bringing people back to the saloon can vary from bog standard XP to new item vendors, and even minigames to kill time between missions. Scuva Stev encourages Cal to find a variety of different types of fish to fill the cantina's aquarium. Peely is a botanist who asks for different plant seeds to grow a garden up on the roof, and the pair known as Beamer and Thule implement a tabletop game called Holo Tactics. This is a pretty engaging minigame that rewards you for scanning enemies you defeat out in the world, and I had a great time beating each of the opponents you can face, even if Beamer's commentary made me want to commit a Van Gogh. When you're making your way through an area, you might come across green gates or these electric boxes which halt your progress in that direction until you unlock the appropriate upgrade later. So you're always coming back, not only to navigate new areas, but revisit old ones to grab what you missed the first time. It's not always just a case of use the new thing to get past the obstacle either. There are some platforming sections where you have to quickly apply a combination of things you've learned so far in order to reach a high off ledge, and when you finally get there, you'll find a meditation point and a whole other area. It's very rewarding to cover as much ground as you can and look out for things instead of just hopping back and forth to the main objective marker. Even though the level of detail added to these planets is far superior to those found in Fallen Order, I was a little underwhelmed by how few planets there actually were. In total, you have 6 systems you can travel between, including Coruscant, which basically you see everything of in the tutorial, and Tanalorr, which is more or less a single corridor with a big room at the end. Nova Garan and the Shattered Moon are similar to Coruscant in the sense that they're still pretty intricately designed, but are so linear that you'll experience everything it has to offer when you go there in the story. Jeddah is huge, but suffers from desert level syndrome, where everything is just far too flat and open to really be intriguing. You do have the spammels to help you traverse the desert quickly, but just looking at this didn't encourage me to seek things out anywhere near as much as Kobo did. You can take this in one of 2 ways. Either there's only one good planet in the game, or the developers knew that the new open world design wouldn't work for everybody, and so included a small handful of worlds to cater to both crowds. If you like to explore and roam around, then you certainly can, but fans of a more linear level design can fully appreciate Nova Garan and just ignore the side content on Jeddah. On a different note, one of the most beloved features of Fallen Order was its customization options, and following suit from its take on abilities and upgrades, Jedi Survivor takes that core mechanic and improves it tenfold. Unfortunately, we can no longer customize the Mantis, although I'm not too heartbroken on that since I only really changed it in the original because the option was there. I think the Mantis looks fine as is and doesn't really need any tinkering with. However, virtually anything else that was customizable before is now even more so. BD1 and your lightsaber can be tweaked in further detail, with even more part options to choose from, a whole range of discoverable metal alloys, rubbers and plastics for different colours, and even a sliding scale to set how pristine versus worn you want them to look. With the addition of the blaster stance, you can also customize the look of Cal's firearm by swapping out the handle and the barrel as desired and changing the metal texture, or swapping out the wooden grip for a rubber one. If you pre-ordered the game, you'll also have access to the parts of Obi-Wan's lightsaber from The Phantom Menace, and if you bought the deluxe edition of the game, then you'll have your hands on Luke's lightsaber from A New Hope and Han Solo's DL-44 blaster. It's all obviously cosmetic, and I like Cal to have his own unique setup anyway, but if you want to sport the stuff that those guys did, then you can, for another £20 on top of the base game price. Cal himself has also had a wardrobe upgrade, with his choice of outfits being far more diverse this time than just coloured ponchos. Not that I'm complaining, I think I'm the only person on the planet that actually liked the ponchos. But now you can switch up his trousers, shirt, jacket, and choose from a variety of colours on those too. You may have noticed that Cal is now sporting a timeless quiff and a slight stubble, which can be swapped out for a clean-shaven buzz cut, a bearded, windswept warrior, or someone that can't go within 500 feet of a school. It's a nice touch because you can view it as an entirely arbitrary system that you'll tinker with whenever you unlock a new type of facial hair, or you can change Cal's appearance based on where he's at mentally in the story. Your Cal and my Cal can look totally different, and I kind of like that. Chronologically, Jedi Survivor takes place 5 years after the events of Fallen Order, but narratively follows on from it rather directly. It's not an incidental sequel. The events of the first game have consequences that bleed right into this one and play a large part in how these people have developed over the last half a decade. The characters have evolved from where they were before, each in different ways, and in case you couldn't tell, everyone has new haircuts to reflect this. Where Fallen Order was a more traditional Star Wars story with its intergalactic stakes and war against an unbeatable force, Jedi Survivor is a much more personal story. The Empire actually takes a back seat here to make room for more character growth and subtle development. Maybe this decision played a part in why it felt this way, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the writing overall is greatly improved from the previous entry. Both our heroes and villains seem to have more depth this time, which makes the altercations inherently more captivating. It's not all light versus dark, but typical human drama that drives the story forward. The villains in the first game were mostly Empire grunts headed by the Inquisitors and Darth Vader. The stakes were basically the same as the Kenobi show. I didn't exactly have a problem with this at the time, but I can't deny that it's very refreshing to have a different threat this time, especially when your story is set between episodes 3 and 4. We ultimately have 3 main villains throughout this one, in the forms of Rayvis, Dagan Gera, and in the end, Bode. Rayvis is certainly the least developed of the 3 with the shortest screen time, but I did still like him for how little we saw him. He is a Gendai warrior who loyally serves Dagan Gera since he bested him in combat many years ago. Granted, it's not much, but it was refreshing because these massive tank-like enemies in games tend to be devoid of personality and just act like mindless brutes. It's clear from their first interaction that Rayvis does respect Cal, despite being loyal to the other side. He politely asks Cal to lay down his weapon, stating that he'll leave in peace. And he does. No backstabbing or 180 turns, he thrives on the fight, but always keeps to his word, which is certainly more respectable than what we'd likely get from Imperial officials. Dagan Gera is a former Jedi from the High Republic that Cal discovers sleeping in a giant Bacta tank on Kobo, who is also the spitting image of Cody Thurn. We proceed to wake him before realizing that he'd switched allegiances and no longer operates by the Jedi Code. But once again, he's not evil. He discovered the hidden planet Tanalorr and wanted to use it to train new Jedi recruits, but after the planet was invaded by marauders, the Council gave the order to abandon the system and destroy any way of navigating there. This infuriated him to the degree that he abandoned his former cause to prioritize reclaiming Tanalorr and achieving his initial vision. The morality of both sides can be argued, which leads to both feeling far more grey than a traditional light versus dark story. I'd have liked for this to be developed a little more, but even as it is, he's a more compelling antagonist than the second sister was. And then we have Bode. Bode is a mercenary who joined Cal's crew sometime before the events of the game, and forms a bond with him that persists until he inevitably betrays us all in the climax. We learn throughout the game that his priorities lie with his daughter Carter, but after he leads the Empire to us in the last act, he also reveals himself to be a former Jedi. After going into hiding, he struck a deal with the Empire to act as a double agent, technically a triple agent in this scene, in return for Carter's protection. He doesn't have any loyalty to the Emperor or the Inquisitors themselves, but will do anything he deems necessary as a desperate father. So overall, I'd say the game's antagonists are pretty strong, even if I do take up some criticism with how certain things play out. Despite enjoying the journey, I do think the pacing falters a little in the last act, where it seems as if all the important plot details and reveals all have to happen right now. Bode's reveal of having force powers is definitely effective and took me by surprise, but I am kind of rolling my eyes now at having another Jedi who survived Order 66. I know this doesn't really seem to bother people that consume every piece of Star Wars media out there, but for someone that only really considers the original and prequel trilogies in their headcanon, I hate this trend of diminishing the tragedy of that day by having everyone survive it. There's also a few instances where the visual storytelling is so on the nose that it's actually a little insulting. I'm thinking specifically of when Dagan reveals that he turned his back on the Jedi and he removes his Kyber crystal and literally turns it red in front of you. This did not need to happen, it just felt like the game saying, "Do you understand? This is a bad guy." Then again, for everything that this game does wrong, it does a great many things right. Cal Kestis, the man himself, is written with far more depth than he was the first time around. He was always likeable, but came across a bit too goody two-shoes and a tad flat before. This time around, he has a bit more of an edge to him. Not in an episode 2 Anakin kind of way, but he actually appears to struggle with his circumstances. Since the end of Fallen Order, the Mantis crew have split up, leaving Cal to take the fight to the Empire by himself, while they pursue different journeys. We know that Cal has recruited many people over the last few years and lost most of them, which has left him a little jaded in day-to-day operations. He struggles with his place in the galaxy, and when things don't go to plan, he gets a little reckless. Early on in Coruscant, the Inquisitors attack and kill a bunch of Cal's crew, including Gab, which did actually disappoint me because I liked her despite her short time on screen. He has a hard time keeping his ego in check, and when things don't work out, he doesn't always know what the best way to respond is. He wants to follow the typical Jedi path, but with Sia gone and no other master to guide him, he often has to figure these things out for himself. In the second half of the game, Cal begins to struggle with keeping to the light and resisting the urge to use dark side abilities. Luckily, he has Merrin at that point to bring him back down to Earth, but I'd actually go as far as to say that Cal Kestis is the most believable character to flirt with the dark side that we've had. I understand Anakin's logic for turning in the prequels, but without the context of anything that happens in the Clone Wars series, the switch does seem to come out of nowhere. It was just too quick. Luke's struggle never even seemed like an option to me. I never considered that he'd actually turn, he was just far too optimistic for that. And Rey had that weird folding lightsaber and shark teeth in the trailer. Cal's struggle always came across as genuine, especially because he doesn't just turn, but is constantly riding that line. He's a good soul and always gives his enemies a chance to change before having to kill them, but he's also impatient and lets his emotions get the better of him sometimes. In fact, the villains often mirror his struggle, with one cutscene in particular even addressing how Cal's desire to reach Tanalorr isn't that different from Dagon's. Again, Bode is a good man looking out for his daughter, but if something threatens the safety of someone he cares about, then he won't hesitate in resorting to ruthless behaviour. And considering how when the game's story is done and you continue exploring the galaxy, you can still use those dark side powers in combat when necessary. Cal doesn't force those feelings back in the climax. In fact, he's more raw than ever, having now lost Sia and Cordova. There is a part of me that's wondering, when they inevitably release that third game, will Cal actually allow these abilities to take over? Hello everybody, thank you very much for watching this video. I apologise greatly for looking a complete mess. It is an absolute heatwave at the moment and it was like 30 something degrees this whole day and I am just sweating and look and feel horrible. But despite that, I hope you did have fun watching this video. I hope you found it informative or entertaining at least. Don't forget to leave a like if you did, and subscribe for more of this kind of stuff, analysis where I pick apart anything that I'm particularly interested in that week. Leave a comment down below of what you thought of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and if there's any other games you'd like me to cover in future. Otherwise, peace out. I'll see you in the next one.